Good evening, creatures of the night. So, this episode is going to be a little different than what we're normally accustomed to, because instead of starting off going right into different Dogman encounters, I'm going to actually explain a theory that I heard a few months ago called the Dogman Belt. This theory is that sightings of upright wolf like creatures like Dogman aren't random at all. Instead, they're following this continuous geographic corridor running from the Great Lakes down through Kentucky and into the deep south. This stretch of land shares dense forest, major waterways, low population density, and centuries of folklore. It's an idea that's simple but unsettling if you ask me. Whatever people are seeing out there, Dogman, Bigfoot, something else entirely, isn't just roaming around randomly. It's moving through connected wilderness because it's smart enough to know how to do that. It's using the same natural routes that real apex predators do, but in a way that initiates fear and a sense of we're not on the top of the food chain. Tonight, I'm going to break down why this Dogman Belt exists and why so many people inside it swear that they're being watched by these Dogman type creatures. This is actually going to be a two-parter because I have so much information that I've collected since October. Tonight, we'll start off what the Dogman Belt is, what type of terrain is involved in the Dogman Belt, and even the centuries of folklore that have been established from Native American tribes to settlers to frontiersmen all the way up until now. And then in the next part, we'll go into more in-depth actual encounters with dogmen from this area. So sit back, enjoy it. This one is going to be great. I've worked for a few months on this one and I'm finally ready to share it with you. But before we begin, how about a little bit of shameless self-promotion? As a lot of you know, I am also an author. I have 2 books out right now. 6 days from now, February 16th, my dearly departed grandma's birthday, book 3 is going to come out. It's called Stay Out of the Forest. It's all about 2 sisters that get lost in my favorite place on earth, the Hoyabachu Forest, and it's up to the 2 of them to stick together and navigate through all kinds of creepy paranormal stuff. If you go on Amazon.com, you can click on the link below. It'll take you to any of those books that you want. The first one, Werewolf Ranch. The second one, The Haunted Doll. And this third one coming out, Stay Out of the Forest. If you get these books, make sure you leave a review. Tell me what you thought of it. And now, I present to you the Dogman Belt. Don't miss your chance to scream, creatures of the night. Enjoy. For as long as human beings have looked into the tree line at night, something has been looking back. Across centuries and cultures, the image of a half-man, half-wolf creature has surfaced again and again. Sometimes it's a symbol of primal fear. Sometimes it's a physical predator described in harrowing detail by those who swear they've seen it. In the modern dictionary of cryptozoology, this entity has been given a name: Dogman. The Dogman phenomenon refers to sightings and encounters with large, upright canine-like creatures reportedly standing between 6 and 9 feet tall. Witnesses describe fur-covered bodies, digitigrade legs like a wolf, elongated muzzles, pointed ears, and an intelligence that seems uncomfortably human. They're not werewolves in the traditional folkloric sense. There is no evidence of transformation, no silver bullets, no full moon. Yet they occupy that same intersection between animal and nightmare as werewolves do. Reports almost always involve a sense of deliberate stalking, like the creature knows it's being seen and chooses when to reveal itself. Though Dogman sightings have been reported across the continental United States and all over the world, there's a strange geographic intensity. From the rolling farmlands and glacial hills of Wisconsin through the dense hardwood forests of Kentucky and Tennessee and down into the pine woods of Alabama, there's this corridor of overlapping encounters and lore. What researchers and investigators are now starting to call the Dogman Belt. This belt represents not only a physical path of hundreds of sightings, but a kind of paranormal artery connecting the Great Lakes wilderness to the Deep South's haunted woods. The term Dogman Belt isn't an official designation, but it's a useful one. Mapping reports geographically reveals a startling continuity, a nearly unbroken chain of encounters along ancient river systems, national forests, and undeveloped terrain. Starting in the upper Midwest, where the Beast of Bray Road first made its headlines in Elkhorn, Wisconsin, the sightings ripple outwards through the neighboring states. The trail stretches southeast through Indiana and Ohio, following the old frontier woodlands, then arcs downward across Kentucky's Land Between the Lakes National Recreation Area, arguably the most infamous dogman hotspot in America. And finally, it continues into the northern Alabama area and Georgia, where hunters, farmers, and motorists still report upright wolf-headed creatures stalking the edges of civilization to this day. What's striking isn't merely the geography, but the consistency. Across more than 1,000 miles and multiple decades, the same behavioral details emerge. The dogman is always described as a predator, but not a mindless one. These things hunt with strategy. They react to wind direction. They demonstrate situational awareness, traits that suggest sophisticated awareness. Though it has been known to attack, it usually intimidates, often tormenting witnesses psychologically rather than physically. These aren't random animals crossing paths with humans. They appear to be encounters with intent. From an ecological perspective, the Dogman Belt follows a pattern familiar to wildlife biologists: continuous habitat connectivity. The corridor cuts through large strips of forest linked by rivers, wetlands, and low human density. It's the same kind of territory that allows species like black bears, cougars, and coyotes to disperse widely without detection. In other words, the geography of Dogman reports mirrors that of real wide-ranging predators like wolves and bears. But the Dogman's physical descriptions and its uncanny behavior place it outside of the known animal kingdom. This paradox makes it a compelling subject of investigation for those studying unexplainable phenomenon. And let's face it, Dogman is my most popular subject on this channel. So when I heard the Dogman Belt term, I jumped at the opportunity to present it to you. The goal of this report is to analyze the Dogman Belt through 3 lenses: geography, ecology, and human testimony. The purpose isn't to prove or disprove the creature's existence outright, but to identify patterns that might explain why certain regions repeatedly give rise to reports of upright canines and why those reports sound so eerily alike. And of course, it's going to be full of Dogman encounters too. From a geographic standpoint, my report will explore how terrain and waterways provide the isolation and mobility these creatures would need to survive unseen. The Dogman Belt includes some of the most heavily forested and least populated areas east of the Mississippi River. Many of these landscapes have changed little since the 1800s, offering vast tracts of unbroken wilderness. From an ecological angle, the belt offers all the resources required to sustain a large predator. Plentiful deer populations, small game to eat too, fresh water, natural shelters. If such a creature were to exist, these ecosystems would be ideal for it. My report will examine how food supply, cover, and seasonal migration routes could play into all these repeated sightings. When we talk about migration, I can't help but think back to those people who email me from Dogman Town. These people have dozens and dozens of encounters with Dogman. There are multiple eyewitnesses from the same area. I can't help but think that maybe it's in this area that these people live, although they've never shared their location with me. They see them in an area called Dogman September, and that's when they think the migration brings them through their town. Finally, from the perspective of human testimony, the consistency and detail of the witnesses' report suggest a phenomenon that transcends simple misidentification. The Dogman appears in stories from hunters, police officers, park rangers, hikers, men, women, children. Witnesses from all walks of life see these things. And a lot of times, they're people who often have no connection to one another and no apparent reason to fabricate stories. Other people that see them are people trained in wildlife. Hunters that have gone out into the forest their entire lives. Wildlife officials whose life depends on being able to identify threats like that. Many of these people even give false names or even choose to stay completely anonymous, choosing only to share their story because they believe that the truth should be told. Their experiences share visceral sensory details. The smell of decay, the sound of growls and claws, the sense of being watched long before the creature appears, even that electrical charge many people feel in the air before it makes itself known. This psychological experience, including the feeling of being toyed with, is one of the Dogman's most disturbing trademarks. Do they feed on fear like some witnesses have claimed, or are they simply a highly intelligent undiscovered species? The Dogman Belt may therefore represent more than just a map of sightings. It could reflect a deeper connection of landscape and fear, a region where human civilization still borders the prehistoric unknown. The forests of the Midwest and South have always carried stories of things that walk upright but shouldn't. In this area,
Folklore and field reports merge until the line between myth and biology blurs entirely. To approach the Dogman phenomenon seriously requires acknowledging both its scientific implications and its cultural gravity. These sightings occur not just in physical space, but in the collective imagination of a region steeped in wilderness mystique. They reveal something profound about how people perceive nature, danger, and themselves when confronted with the unknowable. The idea of this is simple, but still very unsettling. The Dogman Belt's geography and ecology don't just follow the possibility of an unknown predator. They actively invite it. Especially in a day and age where human interactions are more likely to happen. More people than ever are going out into the forest for vacations and fun. Their chances of running into a dogman in these areas become more likely every single time they step into the woods. We are, in theory, encroaching on their territory as well, and they have the ability to fight back. In regions defined by deep forest, ancient waterways, and centuries of human superstition, the dogman thrives both as a legend and a potential species. Whether it be biological or paranormal, none of us know. Whether it walks in the woods in flesh or in some sort of supernatural design, it remains the perfect predator for America's last wild places. It's intelligent, hidden, and waiting just beyond the firelight.
Alright, now let's take a look at the historical and cultural background regarding Dogman. Before there were even Dogman sightings in police reports or online databases, before cryptid channels like this one told campfire stories through glowing screens, there were older names, older fears, older legends, all associated with Dogman. These were whispered by firelight, painted on pottery, carved into totems. The concept of a wolf-headed guardian or a man-beast has haunted North America since long before settlers ever crossed the Appalachians. What modern witnesses call Dogman may well be the latest evolution of something deeply rooted in both Native American spirituality and frontier superstition. These things have been reshaped over centuries into hybrid folklore that we recognize today. So let's look at the wolf guardians and the forest spirits in some of the Native American traditions. Among the Shawnee, Choctaw, and Cherokee peoples, tribes that once dominated the very landscape now forming this Dogman Belt, wolves held a place of profound spiritual importance. To the Shawnee, the wolf was not merely an animal, but a symbol of loyalty, guidance, and guardianship. They believed that wolves could cross between worlds. The realm of the living and the world of the spirits were one and the same to these creatures. They had no problem going back and forth. Some of their stories spoke of man-wolves, and I'm not talking about cursed beings. I'm talking about protectors of sacred places, appointed by ancestral spirits to guard what was forbidden to ordinary humans. The Cherokee told of beings known as Yawa, a name that simply means wolf, but in certain sacred tales, the great Yawa was a shapeshifter. This entity could take on human form to test a tribe's courage, or even to punish disrespect towards nature. To me, that sounds pretty familiar to a lot of the stories we hear nowadays regarding Dogman encounters. People out in the forest, maybe making wrong decisions, and being followed or even hunted by these creatures. So could the Dogman we're seeing nowadays still be these great nature spirits that all of these Native American tribes once relied upon to protect their world? One Cherokee tale even describes a warrior who killed a wolf for sport and was later stalked at night by a man with glowing eyes who ran like a beast. The implication was clear here. Nature watches. Vengeance can walk upright. The Choctaw, whose land stretched from Mississippi to western Alabama, spoke of the Nalusa Falea, the Long Shadow Man. Though often categorized today as part of shadow person or boogeyman lore, descriptions align eerily with Dogman reports. The Nalusa Falea was said to be tall, dark, and wolf-headed, moving silently through the pines and punishing those who disturbed the balance of the forest. Tribal elders described it not as evil, but as a necessary predator, a force of fear meant to keep humans humble. Again, to me that sounds just like the Dogman encounters that we describe nowadays, going out into a world that's not ours, going out and exploring these deep forests and coming across something that we never thought existed. Across these tribes, there was a common thread. A wolfman was not a monster, but a boundary. And maybe that's why so many of these encounters that we witness nowadays end with nobody getting hurt, just terrified. Maybe these wolf creatures are not monsters. They're protectors of these boundaries. Beings that separated sacred from wicked, civilization from wilderness, safe campfires from unknowable darkness. When settlers later poured into these same lands, they inherited that sense of a predator in the trees. They just simply gave it new names and new interpretations. When European settlers began moving westward in the 17th and 18th centuries, they brought with them centuries of werewolf mythology from the Old World. In France, Germany, even the British Isles, the werewolf was a cursed human, doomed to transform under the full moon. These stories often blended Christian morality with older pagan shape-shifting beliefs, man's punishment for indulging his primal instincts. But in the raw, and more often than not, lawless expanse of the American frontier, the story changed. There were no medieval villages or inquisitors to hunt witches here, just endless forest, howling wilderness, predators that could vanish without a trace. European werewolf lore merged with indigenous man-beast legends, and the isolation of pioneer life created something new. A creature that didn't need a curse to exist. It was a being that simply was. Whether or not this was a monster, an animal that just never was discovered, or something from another world, was always debated, even back then. Still, to this day, not many of us can agree on a theory of where these dogmen actually come from. But even back then, by the early 1800s, travelers and trappers along the Ohio River reported seeing what they called devil dogs, or even wolf-headed men. Frontier newspapers even occasionally printed accounts of beasts that walk upright like men. They were stalking hunters, or raiding livestock pens. These early reports rarely used the word werewolf, instead favoring terms like wolf devil or man beast or the wolf thing. Some of these tales came from the same territories that would later host modern dogman legends, particularly Kentucky, Tennessee, and southern Ohio. One particularly eerie parallel appears in the Tennessee stories from the 1800s, in which settlers described a black humanoid wolf prowling the forest along the famous trade route. It didn't transform, and it didn't die easily. Bullets seemed to glance off of it. Local lore eventually painted it as a kind of guardian or curse, depending on who you asked, punishing those who defied natural laws. Again, the hybrid belief persisted. Part beast, part man, but distinctly more intelligent than either creature. By the late 19th century, the concept of the wolfman had shifted from a moral myth to a frontier reality. No longer tied in sin or magic, but it became a wilderness fear. Stories and legends shared across campfires from people traveling through caravans. It was the embodiment of what might happen when humans wander too far from light and order. It turned from legends and superstition to a flesh and blood predator that was really out there in the woods. Yet, none of this stopped any of us from expanding. So now we'll move on to the 20th century, where newspapers and radios gave birth to the modern dogman. As America industrialized, much of the wilderness they feared vanished. But those stories didn't. They simply adapted to modern mediums. The early 1900s saw the rise of tabloid journalism, traveling monster tales, sensationalized to sell papers in small towns. These reports gave local legends new life, and in some cases, national fame. One of the first modern dogman-type reports to receive wide attention was the Beast of Bray Road. It was in Wisconsin during the 1930s, although modern reports started again in the 80s. But in fact, the very first dogman reported in the Beast of Bray Road area was in the 1930s. Rural newspapers described it as a hairy man-beast that terrorized farmers and left claw marks on barns. Similar reports appeared in Ohio, Illinois, and Arkansas throughout the 1940s and the 1950s. Though each case was local, the themes were consistent. Large, upright, wolf-faced creatures seen near isolated farmland or woodland roads, always at dusk, always gone before sunrise. But it was in the mid-20th century that truly transformed dogman into a household cryptid. In the 1950s and 60s, we saw a cultural obsession with monsters, fueled by Cold War anxieties, a golden age of pulp magazines, and drive-in horror films. During this period, sightings of Bigfoot, the Loch Ness Monster, Mothman, the Michigan Dogman all began surfacing with renewed craze. Cryptozoology emerged as both a hobby and a media niche. The Dogman, as a term, didn't solidify until later, but the creature itself had already taken shape in public consciousness. But it was in fact the Michigan Dogman legend that arguably cemented the modern archetype. It originated around Wexford County in 1887, but exploded in popularity after the 1987 radio broadcast of The Legend by DJ Steve Cook. The Michigan Dogman blended real reports with creative storytelling. Yet, the public response proved something significant. There was already this collective awareness of this creature. Most people didn't talk about it until that legend debuted on the radio. Some people thought that it was real. Some people knew that what Steve Cook was producing was simply a story. But yet, many of these people knew that the legend was real because either they or people they knew had seen some kind of creature that fit the same description that the legend talked about. People began calling in from across the Midwest with stories spanning decades, describing encounters that long predated Cook's broadcast. Meanwhile, the Beast of Bray Road sightings in the late 1980s and the early 1990s gave the Dogman a face. Literally. A newspaper reporter, who I personally regard as the greatest Dogman researcher of all time, the late great Linda Godfrey, covered this story in Wisconsin and turned local gossip into a national cryptid canon. Witnesses described the same terrifying creature seen by generations before them. This muscular, wolf-headed creature walking on two legs, watching from ditches or cornfields, or standing there watching you with this intelligence that can't be replicated in the animal kingdom. Unlike earlier werewolf myths, this was not a cursed man at all. It was an apex predator, physical, intelligent, prowling farmlands just beyond the edges of town, sometimes even coming closer to town, always bringing with it a stench that made your stomach curl, an intelligence that made you know this was not an ordinary creature, and an undescribable fear that appears out of nowhere. Sometimes this creature would even bring with it a feeling of a static charge. By the 21st century, the Dogman had become an established part of American monster mythology, joining the same ranks as Bigfoot, Mothman, the Loch Ness Monster, the Jersey Devil. Yet, it remained distinct in tone and fear factor. Where Bigfoot was often portrayed as shy or even benevolent, the Dogman was malicious, mocking, invasive. Its eyes glowed with awareness. It wanted to be seen, and it seemed to enjoy the fear that it made everybody feel. Modern technology gave this old legend new life. The rise of the internet, YouTube storytelling, paranormal podcasts, they all turned scattered campfire tales into an interconnected digital library of encounters. How many Dogman encounters are on this channel alone? I haven't counted, but I'd say it'd be more than 200 encounters. Then you have people like Vic Cundiff, who have 500 episodes, all focusing on Dogman encounters. Without this type of technology, without the internet and this interconnected web, I would say maybe 1% of these stories would actually reach people that wanted to hear them. Witnesses who once feared ridicule could now share experiences anonymously, and the similarities were staggering. From Wisconsin to Alabama, the creature's description rarely wavered. It was tall, lean, covered in dark fur, with canine legs, clawed hands, and a face that could almost smile, although a terrifying smile is what it was often described as. At the same time, researchers began noting how these digital stories overlapped precisely with regions of historical significance. The cloaked hedgehog has a very in-depth mapping system of Dogman encounters throughout the world. With that, you can see the patterns in the Dogman Belt. More often than not, these encounters, at least in North America, follow that trail. And they're often near ancient burial mounds, sacred lands, war sites, or long-forgotten Native American territory. The very places once guarded by spirits in wolf form were now home to Dogman encounters. Some researchers interpret this as coincidence. Others see it as a cultural memory, resurfacing in modern language. In a world where the wild has shrunk, the Dogman represents the last predator we can still imagine. It's the manifestation of everything untamed that civilization has paved over but not forgotten. It's still the boogeyman that hides in the dark. And people as a whole love to be scared. So a creature like this is understandably intriguing. And whether it's biological, spiritual, or even supernatural, the Dogman endures because it speaks to something primal in us. The fear that we are not at the top of the food chain after all. The fear that science and religion can't explain everything. From the sacred guardians of the Shawnee and Cherokee to the werewolves of French folklore and the modern Dogman of YouTube fame, the pattern is unmistakable. This is a creature that seemingly evolves with us. Could it be because it's so intelligent? We might never know. Yet the eyes of this beast remain the same. They watch us, and they only let us know that they're there when they feel like it. It's that same intelligence looking back from the darkness, the same silhouette at the edge of the firelight, waiting for us to remember that our ancestors knew something that we have pushed to the back of our minds. The forest still has teeth. This so-called Dogman Belt is not formally recognized by any region or geological or political map. I'll be the first one to tell you, it's all just a theory. But it's a theory that I looked at, studied, weighed, plotted out, long before I even started putting this report together. It's something that I can get behind. And if you know me, I don't jump into any of these things without doing research. I want to make sure that what I'm talking about makes sense. So when you plot this by hand, and base it on decades of eyewitness encounters, it traces this unmistakable corridor of wilderness that cuts through the eastern half of the United States like a scar. It begins right by the glacial hills and farmlands of southern Wisconsin. It bends southeast through the river basins of Illinois and Indiana. It crosses the dense hard woods of Kentucky and Tennessee and then dissolves into the pine forests and the swamp margins of northern Alabama and Georgia. This belt covers roughly 1,000 miles of adjoining terrain. It's like a natural highway of forest and water, old enough and wild enough to hide anything that prefers not to be found. First off, you have Wisconsin, which is like a northern gateway for this belt. At the top of the belt lies Wisconsin, the place where modern Dogman mythology first howled into national attention. The Kettle Moraine State Forest, carved by retreating glaciers, forms this labyrinth of ridges and kettle lakes and wooded valleys that stretch from Elkhorn and Bray Road down to the Illinois border. This region blends farmland with sudden walls of forest, creating perfect ambush terrain. Streams and wetlands connect these woods in this loose network, corridors where deer travel and where, by many accounts, something larger moves with them. Now, if you were an apex predator that ensured your survival by hiding and not making yourself known, wouldn't some place like this that has an abundance of deer where you can feed off of them suit your purpose? Wouldn't that be somewhere that you might want to just dig in? If I was a dogman, I would want to do it that way. And even though southern Wisconsin's human population is dense along the highways, the back roads still twist through these long, dark stretches of oaks and pines and trees that are so tall they block out light. Even a few hundred yards from town, noise drops away. Witnesses describe encounters near small creeks and abandoned barns, often within sight of human habitation, just far enough away to vanish into tree cover within seconds. This mix of suburban edge and wild interior marks the northern boundary of the belt, civilization brushing up against something older. Then, moving southeast, the belt narrows into the Ohio River watershed, where Illinois' Shawnee National Forest and Indiana's Hoosier National Forest form a near continuous green bridge. This corridor of timber and hills and river valleys has changed little since the time of the frontier. The terrain is rugged, for sure, nobody's denying that, but you can also navigate through it, especially if you're an apex predator who loves to keep itself hidden. This is dense enough for concealment, open enough for fast movement. Here, population density dips dramatically. Between small agricultural towns lie miles of unlit country roads and unbroken forest. Night travel feels isolated when you're traveling. Headlights disappear into blackness that seems endless. Reports from this zone often describe creatures crossing roads or standing at tree lines near rivers, as though following the waterways south. The Ohio River itself is wide and ancient and winding. It acts as both a physical and symbolic artery for the Dogman Belt. Nearly every state along its banks has Dogman legends. From the Defiance, Ohio Railroad werewolf of 1972 to modern accounts into southern Indiana. Ecologically, this mid-belt region forms a transition zone between northern deciduous forests and southern mixed hardwoods. Deer, raccoons, wild turkey, they all thrive here. Coyotes and black bears are returning. This environment offers food. It offers shelter, mobility, exactly what a large predator would require. At the center of the Dogman Belt lies the most notorious landscape, the Land Between the Lakes National Recreation Area, the LBL. It's straddling the Kentucky-Tennessee border. This 170,000-acre peninsula is bounded by Kentucky Lake to the west and Lake Barkley to the east, forming a natural island of wilderness nearly 50 miles long. Its population is sparse. It has thick forest, restricted zones that make a haven for wildlife, and according to hundreds of stories, something else there entirely. And it may be the most aggressive of the Dogman samples we have come to know. The LBL's topography is a study in seclusion. There's rolling hills, narrow hollows, damp, claustrophobic woods. Even during the day, visibility is limited. At night, the darkness is absolute. The abundance of deer, hogs, small game, all provide an endless buffet for predators like Dogman. But unlike bears or cougars, which tend to flee from humans, Dogman reports from the LBL emphasize territorial aggression. Creatures pacing campsites, following vehicles, screaming from tree lines, and even attacking people. Everybody here is probably very accustomed to the Dogman legend of the LBL, where the family was butchered by it. That's the type of aggression that this creature here brings. But that type of aggression isn't known throughout the Dogman Belt. Some of these creatures, like up north where we talk about all the different Native American legends where it protects the forest, are just that. Creatures that seem to scare you out of a territory that you probably shouldn't be in the first place. South of the LBL, things cool down again. The aggression of the LBL Dogman is undeniable, but south of the LBL, Tennessee's Cumberland Plateau continues the corridor. Here, vast state forests and wildlife management areas link seamlessly with private timberland. Caves honeycomb the limestone hills. The winding rivers like the Duck and Elk cut deep, shaded valleys. Sightings cluster near these waterways, reinforcing the theory that the Dogman uses river systems as natural highways. Population density remains low throughout much of this region too. Drive 15 minutes off the interstate and cell service disappears completely. It's easy to imagine something intelligent choosing to live within shouting distance of modern life, yet hidden by terrain that swallows sound and light alike. The belt fades but never fully ends in the pine thickets of northern Alabama and the foothills of Georgia. Here, the Appalachian Mountains give way to flatwood basins, creating a patchwork of swamp, forest, and farmland. The Talladega National Forest and the Chattahoochee National Forest form two major wilderness anchors, rich in caves, rivers, and steep ravines. This southern landscape carries a different energy. Hotter, wetter, more primal. The air hums with insects, moss hangs from trees, mist clings to creek beds. Hunters in these states report seeing black-furred upright canines standing at the edges of firelight or crossing back roads just before dawn. The Chestnut Mountain Werewolf of Georgia and the Jefferson County Creature of Alabama are local manifestations of the same pattern. Remote woodlands, sparse populations, a heavy overlap with Native American sacred sites and burial grounds. Despite urban expansion, these southern forests remain remarkably wild. Large tracts of timber stretch unbroken for miles, linked by river bottoms and game trails. Even in the 21st century, you can drive for hours without passing another person. That isolation, combined with an abundance of prey and cover, mirrors the conditions of the upper Midwest, effectively closing the loop of the Dogman Belt. From Wisconsin to Alabama, the Dogman is defined by continuity of habitat. Though climate and vegetation shift gradually from north to south, the essential ingredients remain constant. Forest density, water availability, prey population, and low human intrusion. This type of continuity allows not just animals, but stories to migrate. Biologists studying wildlife migration note that predators often follow ecotones, the transitional borders between one biome and another. because these edges attract prey, and a predator would not ever survive without a prey source. The Dogman Belt functions as one vast ecotone, the meeting place of northern and southern ecosystems. To a large, intelligent superpredator, it would be a natural access road. Equally significant is the psychological continuity. Each region along the belt shares a similar relationship to the wild. Close enough to feel it, distant enough to fear it. The rural communities of Wisconsin, Kentucky, and Alabama may differ in accent and climate, but their stories describe the same sound. A heavy bipedal gait in the leaves, a low growl that vibrates in the chest, eyes reflecting amber in the beam of a flashlight. Something that looks remarkably like a werewolf, but exists in flesh and blood. Environmental maps reveal how the major river systems, like the Wisconsin, Illinois, Ohio, Tennessee, and Coosa, weave a near continuous path of lowland forest and wetland. From space, this looks like a single green ribbon. On the ground, it feels like a series of isolated dark pockets. The people living in those pockets don't think in terms of biomes. They think in terms of what lives out there. For centuries, that answer has never been reassuring. It's easy to assume that modern America is too crowded for legends like Dogman to persist. Yet, the Dogman Belt passes through areas that remain profoundly rural. Population density drops to fewer than 40 people per square mile in many counties along the corridor. Logging, mining, farming communities all occupy small clearings amid hundreds of square miles of timber. Nighttime brings silence broken only by animals, and occasionally, something that sounds too heavy to be a deer, walking around outside your bedroom window. Those same factors that limit scientific study, remoteness, poor lighting, isolation, also help sustain the mystery of Dogman and other cryptids. Hunters, campers, and truckers are still the primary witnesses. Their encounters occur in the periphery of human activity, the line where civilization ends and wilderness begins. From a sociological view, this is exactly where folklore thrives, at the boundaries of the known. This environmental continuity explains why the same creature, described in the same way, appears across so many states. The land itself connects the stories. Waterways serve as both literal and psychological conduits. They flow, they carry whispers, they allow access to different areas for an upright predator to wander through without ever being seen, because these waterways are like roads and freeways for these creatures. The Dogman Belt, then, is not merely geography. It's the geography of dread. A 1,000-mile stretch where wilderness still holds dominion, and where, on certain nights, the eyes in the tree line are said to stand too high above the ground to belong to any known animal. If we strip away the folklore, if we strip away the superstition, if we strip away the campfire fear that surround Dogman encounters, what remains is an ecological question, one that demands to be treated seriously. Scientists can say that a creature like that doesn't exist. People that think they know everything about the land can say that creatures like that are just a myth. But the remaining question is, could the land itself sustain such a predator? Not outright proof, but the theory that a predator that we have not discovered could thrive in this type of terrain. If the Dogman exists as a biological organism, it would require food, shelter, breeding grounds, a sufficient isolation to avoid detection by humans for centuries. Now I know, just as well as you do, that those factors are playing against whether or not the Dogman is actually a living, breathing creature. But the Dogman Belt, that stretches from the cold glacial woods of Wisconsin to the humid pine thickets of Alabama, could, in theory, provide all of the things that these creatures need. And it could provide it in abundance. So let's talk about Dogman's hypothetical habitat. It's nocturnal and migratory. We know that, based on the behaviors that hundreds, maybe even thousands of eyewitnesses have said, most occur at night. Most occur in some form of forest deep in the woods, where these creatures have access to migrating back and forth. Let's talk about its diet, the prey ecology, the adaptive features that could explain its ability to hunt intelligently and still remain unseen. So for starters, you have habitat viability for a large predator. A viable apex predator has to possess three environmental supports: adequate territory and cover, reliable prey availability, and minimal competition with humans or other carnivores. As I've said numerous times in this video already, the Dogman Belt offers these conditions to near perfection. Its forests are among the most extensive and biodiverse in all of North America. Wisconsin's Kettle Moraine, Kentucky's Land Between the Lakes, Alabama's Talladega National Forest all feature large swaths of unfragmented canopy, areas where dense woods and undergrowth obscure visibility even a few hundred yards away. Many zones are managed as wildlife refuges or logging tracts with restricted night access. That leaves hundreds of square miles virtually unpatrolled after dark. That's where these creatures could thrive. Each state within this corridor contains tens of thousands of acres of mixed deciduous forest, interlaced with creeks, rivers, ravines, caves, mountainous areas. These terrain provide features that are perfect for concealment and denning opportunities for a stealthy predator like Dogman. Furthermore, the seasonal climate gradient, cold winters in the north, mild ones in the south, offers an evolutionary incentive for mobility. I have put that theory out there numerous times that these creatures can migrate back and forth from northern America down to the southern area based on the conditions of the weather. If these creatures prefer the cold, they can go up north. If they prefer it humid, they can go down south. Even if these creatures migrate back and forth for perfect conditions for breeding, like a great white shark, they are able to do it with the Dogman Belt because it provides a perfect migration system. A predator capable of traveling along river systems could theoretically follow food availability year-round, much like wolves and cougars once did across the continent. Whereas large carnivores like mountain lions face detection and conflict due to proximity to humans, Dogman reports cluster precisely in the areas that bridge civilization and wilderness. Farmland borders, rural roads, hunting zones. This pattern suggests not merely a need for isolation, but a preference for it, where prey is plentiful and visibility for humans is poor. The majority of credible Dogman encounters occur at night or in low light of dawn or dusk. This supports the idea of a nocturnal or crepuscular predator, meaning it's mostly active during dawn or dusk. They are adapted for stealth, for low visibility hunting. Many witnesses describe eyes that glow amber, or green, or red, a likely reflection of the tapetum lucidum, the light reflective layer behind the retina found in nocturnal mammals like wolves, cats, and raccoons. I'm a former vet tech. I spent 17 years working with animals. I can describe that glow that they're talking about perfectly. I've seen it in cats more times than I can count. The Dogman's mobility across multiple states also raises the question of migration or dispersal behavior. When mapped, sightings often follow major river systems. Like I said, the Wisconsin, Illinois, Ohio, Tennessee, the Coosa rivers, these waterways form a natural corridor of movement, connecting prey-rich habitats while offering cover and access to water. Predators frequently use rivers as biological highways. We've seen it in black bears and cougars. They follow riparian zones where land and water meet, when expanding territory because rivers provide both concealment and food. A bipedal predator could exploit these same features while avoiding human detection. Water is known to mask scent. It muffles sound. It creates predictable paths for prey. Moreover, riverbanks are typically lined with soft mud or sand, allowing a creature to walk silently or to backtrack and obscure its own footprints, a behavior that would align with witness reports of tracks suddenly just disappearing. It would also align with the fact that if a river rises or a creek rushes through, all proof of footprints would be lost. If the Dogman exists as a large-bodied omnivore or carnivore, it would require 10 to 15 pounds of meat per day on average, comparable to a large wolf or cougar. Such a caloric demand could easily be met through opportunistic hunting along rivers and agricultural borders, where deer, small mammals, and livestock are abundant. Dogman are also have been known to scavenge carrion, which wouldn't be surprising either. If Dogman stole kills from smaller predators, much like hyenas steal from lions, it would be an opportunistic feeder. It would look at this as an opportunity to consume calories without having to exert any. One reason the Dogman Belt remains ecologically plausible is its extraordinary prey base. The entire corridor is part of the white-tailed deer range, a species numbering over 25 million individuals across the United States, with the highest densities found in the Midwest and Southeast. If Dogman is real, deer would be its primary food source. Witnesses frequently report hearing screams, bone-cracking sounds, mutilated carcasses consistent with predation rather than scavenging. Deer remains found in remote areas of the LBL and other parks occasionally display injuries inconsistent with known predators. There's deep slashes rather than bite marks, torsos torn open as though by powerful hands. While most such findings can be attributed to coyotes or bears, some defy easy categorization. Beyond deer, the Dogman Belt teems with small and medium-sized prey. There's rabbits, raccoons, possums, foxes, plentiful along the forest edge. I myself have presented numerous stories where even a fox has become prey for a dogman. You also have feral hogs. They're destructive, slow-moving. They're targets ideal for ambush. And then you have livestock, particularly goats, sheep, and calves on rural farms. When these attacks occur, they're often reported missing under mysterious circumstances. The dogman's hunting style, as inferred from witness reports, resembles that of an ambush predator, capable of explosive bursts of speed but relying primarily on stealth. Descriptions of it, crouching low or wading downwind, imply advanced hunting intelligence, not just instinct alone, but strategy too. Several reports from Kentucky and Tennessee describe the creature stalking campsites or approaching hunters silently until discovery, suggesting curiosity and control rather than desperation for food. Then there's the example of a woman who was camping alone and found herself in the presence of two dogmen. While one distracted her, the second one snuck towards her from behind, crouched low on all fours. Could distraction also be a hunting tactic the dogman has learned? This woman had described the one distracting her as a larger specimen than the one that was crouching down. Could this distraction technique also be something that older dogmen teach the younger dogmen as a way to hunt and survive? From a biological standpoint, intelligence in predators correlates with energetic efficiency. Smarter hunters waste less energy. They calculate opportunity. If dogman possesses an intelligence even slightly higher than that of wolves, it could explain both its adaptability and its apparent awareness of human danger. For a predator like dogman to remain largely undocumented despite repeated sightings, it must possess a remarkable suit of camouflage, intelligence, and sensory adaptations. The dogman's fur coloration, consistently described as dark brown, gray-black, charcoal, it would allow it to blend perfectly with tree trunks and shadows. Many witnesses claim they didn't even see it until it moved, an indicator of motion-based detection avoidance used by both large cats and human hunters. Camouflage. The body proportions described, long limbs, narrow torso, digitigrade stance, those all suggest an animal built for silent locomotion. Walking on the balls of its feet, like a wolf or a big cat, reduces sound while moving through dry leaves and undergrowth. The musculature reported in daylight sightings, thick shoulders, a tapered waist, it implies both climbing ability and explosive strength, useful for sprinting long distances or even carrying prey. A long time ago, I presented a case where a man was driving down the street and saw a dogman running across the street on all fours, carrying a deer over its shoulder. That alone shows how remarkably strong these predators are. And then you have the odor, which is another recurring detail. Witnesses describe a stench of wet dog or rotting meat or sulfur. This could serve as an olfactory deterrent, similar to the scent gland of mustelids or simply a byproduct of a high-protein diet and low hygiene. Interestingly, many accounts mention the smell appearing suddenly, possibly released when the creature is threatened or agitated, much like a skunk's defensive spray or a bear's musk. In my time as a vet tech, you learned what an anal gland is. It's a small gland right inside the anus that secretes a very potent smell. It's one of the most disgusting smells that I have ever smelled personally. And the theory of these things are it's an adaptation from a long time ago when dogs were still wild animals, a trait that had never been evolved away. Could it be something like that? There's also a theory that Dogman hunts primarily by scent, which again is a very canine trait. Many witnesses claim the creature sniffed their tents or the air around campsites before withdrawing, behavior consistent with cautious evaluation rather than mindless aggression. These measured restraints reinforce the theory that Dogman is not merely predatory, but intelligent, capable of assessing risk and determining whether or not a human would fall under the category of food or foe. Among the most chilling consistencies in Dogman encounters is the sense that it knows fear and enjoys it. Witnesses often report the creature lingering within sight, revealing itself just long enough to elicit panic before vanishing. This pattern suggests a psychological behavior, one that uses intimidation as a tool. Maybe these dogmen can actually smell that fear. This behavior could indicate predatory play or dominance assertion. Apex predators sometimes exhibit what's called cruel curiosity, testing responses from potential threats. Wolves, for instance, may circle unfamiliar prey to gauge reaction. Primates engage in intimidation displays to measure dominance. Dogman encounters seem to merge both of these. A predator assessing a rival species it doesn't intend to kill, but wishes to control through fear. Reports of the creature sniffing tents, following vehicles, even tapping on windows also fit within patterns of territorial marking or even boundary testing. It may not need to feed on humans. Instead, it reinforces its psychological territory through intimidation. An apex predator reminding intruders who the true inhabitant is. Now picture this. If you were on a farm, way out in the middle of nowhere, and something tapped on your window in the middle of the night, you look out and it's something that looks like a dogman, would your first instinct be to go out there and fight it for dominance or territory? Or would you curl up in a ball in the fetal position, hiding under your bed until day came? I know myself, I wouldn't be fighting anything. If I saw a dogman, I would go the other way. If we consider evolutionary patterns, intelligence in predators typically arises when an animal needs to outthink both prey and competitors. A bipedal hunter would require exceptional coordination, exceptional balance, and especially sensory processing. These traits imply a large and effective brain. Many descriptions mention forward-facing eyes and expressive features, hallmarks of depth perception and emotional communication. These characteristics place Dogman in a niche between human and wolf, a hybrid of primal instinct and calculated awareness. And maintaining a large body mass while remaining unseen requires an efficient energy strategy. If Dogman exists, it likely leads low exposure, high yield lifestyles. Rather than constant motion like wolves, it may adopt a sit and wait predation model, ambushing deer or even scavenging carrion. By hunting along rivers, it conserves energy. It follows prey paths instead of forging new trails. Seasonally, it could migrate south in winter following deer herds, then return north during breeding cycles when competition is lowest. The same pattern is seen in bears and cougars that cover hundreds of miles between seasonal ranges. This could explain the distribution of sightings throughout the Dogman Belt. The same population moving seasonally, rather than multiple isolated groups or packs of these creatures. That migration could also reduce the need for large permanent populations. Even a few dozen spread across the area could be responsible for the amount of encounters recorded over the past century. We don't know how long these creatures live. This would also explain why physical evidence, like tracks, hair, or carcasses, remain elusive. A small, intelligent population skilled at concealment could persist for generations without leaving definitive proof. So whether biological, supernatural, or psychological, the Dogman's behavior mimics that of efficient predators that we know exist today. It has nocturnal activity. It has exploitation of waterways, calculated intimidation, selective exposure. Its survival strategy, should it really exist, is brilliant. It lives near humans, feeds on their ecosystems, but it never crosses the line into visibility unless it wants to. The Dogman Belt provides a natural laboratory for this possibility. The forests are thick enough to hide an apex predator. We know that. We know that from studying mountain lions and bears. The waterways provide endless routes of escape, and human populations remain low enough for myths to flourish unchallenged. Every factor required for an unknown species to thrive is already in place. The only question is, do you believe that it's real, or don't you?